So I will try to be to go back to some of the issues that we discussed already last time, because some questions were asked at the end, and I think it's maybe interesting to try to clarify them. Maybe I will not manage because it's a difficult topic. And I will also introduce some other elements in the discussion, and we will see if these are useful or not. And the picture here that you can see is it's coming from a translation of a paper by Boltzmann. And this is nice because it's showing a cloud of particles, which is could be an ensemble of particles in a gas. And I think the comment of the author was to say, imagine that you have a cloud of particles having the shape of the Boltzmann face. And of course, we will say that it's non-usual and non-typical in a sense. And the question, the fundamental question of thermodynamics and physics is why this kind of things is not observed in nature. And in Bobian mechanics, somehow the question is not so different, because the question is why do we have the quantum equilibrium is a question that somehow is difficult to answer, and there's a lot of debate nowadays about this issue. And this is essentially because Bobian mechanics, as it is called, even though Bobian mechanics is not the best name for this, Bobian mechanics is a deterministic theory, which is depending on the initial condition and of the law of the evolution that you have. So the law of evolution is simple. As I remind you, it's ontological deterministic approach. So here you use the wave function as a starting point, and from the wave function you can obtain the phase. So example for a single electron, and from the phase, by taking the gradient of the you got the velocity, and the velocity is useful for defining the path. So and this can be done for wave particle duality, Stirner-Gerlach experiment, Bell inequality, and so on and so forth. So many things. And this is a part of the theory which is deterministic, but there's also the probability part, which is essential if you want to recover quantum mechanics. So when you say that Bobian mechanics is identical to quantum mechanics, this is actually not completely true, because it requires to have a clear assumption concerning the probability law, and the debates are around this subject. And I remind you the main mathematical ingredient that was needed for discussing probability concept in Bobian mechanics. So I remind you that from the Schrödinger equation, you deduce conservation law, that is well known. You have a divergence of current and a time derivative of density, and this density is psi square, and this is the psi square that we call the Born rule for the probability of finding an electron, for example, at point x at time t in a volume dx. So it's an elementary probability, density probability, and this is a standard rule, and from Bobian mechanics, from de Broglie-Bohm theory, we need to introduce a density of probability rho, which is more general than psi square, and which are more or less the same status, but is defining the probability to find a particle at point x, because the particle is here all the time. Somehow it's following a trajectory. It's not disappearing mysteriously and appearing in your apparatus. It has a continuous path, and so it's the probability to find a particle, but it's the probability for the particle to be here somehow. But the particle was already somewhere before, and it will be somewhere else after, maybe. So it's a bit different from the standard probability. But in general, the probability has no reason to be identical to Born rules. So we can introduce a prefactor f like that, a coefficient between psi and rho, psi square and rho, and this f coefficient is very convenient for me because it has all the property of a density of probability. Somehow its time evolution is such that the f is a constant of motion, so the derivative of f, like defined like that, is a so-called Lagrangian derivative in fluid dynamics, is equal 0. And so it's reminiscent of something that we already discussed last time, the Liouville theorem in statistical mechanics. And also the interesting part from the mathematical side is that we can define a kind of super volume, I would say a measure, a weight, I don't know what you can call it, delta gamma, which is a proportional to psi squared and which is multiplied by dx. So this is a quantity which has all the nice property of a volume in the configuration space, because it's preserved during the time evolutions. It's very similar then to the Liouville theorem, but so you have incompressible fluid in certain sense, and the density probability like that will be written equivalently as rho dx, so it's a natural way of writing probability, or f delta gamma. And this new notation is better because, in my sense, it's better because you absorb all the complexity of psi in the definition for gamma, and f will become the microcanonical ensemble if you have Born rules. So if you want to have Born rules, you have to put f equal 1, and this is looking like a microcanonical ensemble. So microcanonical ensemble, I say, is very natural from the Bayesian point of view. If you read, for example, the paper by Jens and people like that, if you maximize your ignorance, f equal 1 is natural. So it's for me, it's quite logical to have f equal 1, but we can try to justify it better. So all the discussion about this topic is here somehow. Why f equal 1? And last time we focused on one discussion. I'm afraid that I was not very clear at that time. Maybe I will be better today. I'm not sure. So it's a difficult topic. It's about the status of the law of large number, and which is for me a way from connecting abstract probability to statistics. And we can say, in certain sense, that it is a tautological statement about the definition of a probability, in a sense that many people are thinking about. Maybe I will go to the next slide. It's simpler, prefer. Many people are thinking about the probability in the Laplacian way. So imagine that you have a quantum experiment in a box, Stern-Gerlach. So it's a single event. Let's say you want to know what is the outcome, but you don't know. So you assign a probability to the outcomes. So the different outcomes, you can assign numbers that they are additive and have some properties. And so in quantum mechanics, this is the Born rule, for example. And then you say, okay, this is, for me, the Laplacian way of thinking about probability. And now you want to connect this Laplacian probability to the frequentist point of view, which is connected to Gibbs ensemble. So you reproduce an experiment m times where m is infinite. So like that, you have a different definition of probability. And many people are fighting about what is the best definition of probability. And for me, this is nonsense, because already from the start, this is the same thing. If you apply the probability from the Bayesian point of view, and if you say, I assign this number to a single event, and then you define a Bernoulli process, you reproduce many times, then you have the law of large number, which is telling you what I wrote before, then the frequency tends to probability with high probability. But of course, what you mean by probability is a question that is still open. What is a probability? But the law of large number is already giving you an answer, because you say that when n is infinite, you have the equality, mathematical equality, which is rigorous between your p alpha and your ratio, which is a frequency. And so most of the discussion in the language of probability are for me tautological, in the sense that when you already know the property of probability given by Laplace and by Jens and Kolmogorov and all these people who are thinking deeply about probability, you realize that the frequentist view is somehow not independent from the Laplace view. And the statistical interpretation, for example, defined by Glokintsev in Russia, many people around the world, I think, are focusing on this issue. Okay, the status of frequentist versus Laplacian. And in a discussion with the two group of authors that I mentioned last time, so Valentini on one side and Goldstein, Zanghi, and Dour on the other side, there is a kind of debate about the status of probability, like this one. For Dour, Goldstein, and Zanghi, the fundamental issue is about, I think, what they call the measure of probability. That it is for me a Bayesian notion, even though they will not be agreeing with that, because they think that typicality is something different from probability. But I don't believe that. Probability is the same thing. Another way, typicality is a statement about probability, but if you don't have a measure of probability, if you don't have a weight, you cannot do anything about typicality. And Valentini is right to say that if you change your way of thinking about your way of defining the weight, the way of defining the probability, then you get different results. And it can be shown that if you change the law of your way of thinking about the weight, if you don't use psi squared but something else like f psi squared, then you will get another law, which will be not the standard law of quantum mechanics, it will be the one written here, which is called non-equivariant and quantum non-equilibrium. So, this is one of the issues. The thing is that, no, I'm going to the wrong side. I'm sorry for that. Okay, this I will let it because it's not interesting. The thing is that one of the questions is why they use this equivariant distribution. Why the equivariant distribution is so interesting? Goldstein and Struve say in 2007 that it is the most general distribution that you can imagine, which is depending only of psi, of the modulus of psi. If you're looking for a distribution having this shape, so you are looking for a distribution such that is a function of psi, of the modulus of psi, then you get immediately psi squared. You have no choice. And this is because if you apply this formula into the conservation law, you get, after a few calculations, the psi square function. Personally, I think about it in a different way. I didn't know very much the paper of Goldstein and Struve, and I found it in a different way. I was making the analogy with the Gleason-Everett theorem. So the Gleason-Everett theorem is, as you know, is coming. Everett was the guy who invented the mini-world theory, but he was also very good in mathematics because in this thesis is a lot of discussion about probability and entropy. And for example, he was deriving the law that we call now the Gleason theorem. You see that the paper was published in the same year than the Gleason theorem, so we can rigorously call it the Gleason-Everett or Everett-Gleason theorem as you want. And the postulate that he was accepting is natural. It's the additivity axiom, and a form of additivity axiom telling that if you want to have a probability which is a function only of the modulus square of your system, and if you assume a kind of additivity rule like this one, which is telling that the probability of a sum of events should be the sum of the probability. By sum of the event, I mean the sum of the square. So you have a Cauchy-like equation, which is called, which is simple. This one, g the x plus y equal g the x plus g the y. This can be solved simply, and you get the linear. You get a differential equation, and you get a linear solution x plus b. Then we know that b should be equal to 0 because when x equals 0, probability should be equal to 0, and then you have a linear law. And for by normalization, you got the Born rule. So Born rules is simple from the point of view of Gleason and Everett. It's a mathematical trick, it's beautiful. And what is interesting for me is that the Cauchy-like equation here is not new. Actually, it was used by Maxwell. Excuse me, I have a problem with this screen. Maxwell, in order to derive the law that we share his name with Boltzmann, the Maxwell-Boltzmann probability distribution. It was for the velocity distribution that he did it, but it doesn't matter. In order to demonstrate this law, Maxwell was using the work of previous researchers, in particular in sociology, where they were trying to understand the status of the Gaussian distribution. And they were using the independence postulate. So the idea was that if you have a system which is composed of two subsystems which are weakly coupled, so you can suppose that the density of probability is the product of the probability of the subsystem. So probability of subsystem 1 times the probability of subsystem 2 equal probability of the system 1 plus 2. If you do that in a phase space, and if you suppose that the probability is depending only on the energy, then you get this energy, this formula here, which is quite simple to understand. You say the probability of the Hamiltonian H1 times the probability of the Hamiltonian H2 is equal to sum of the equal probability of the sum H1 plus H2. So it is again a Cauchy-like condition. which is simple to resolve. And again, as we know from our lecture in statistical mechanics, we will cover the standard Maxwell-Boltzmann probability. This is probably one of the first ways when we teach it at school, in a university, to understand this law. So it's very similar for me from the Gleason theorem in that sense, and this motivates another kind of proof. So the proof will be the following. Imagine that you have now two subsystems, 1 and 2, which are quantum systems, and you want to a distribution rho, which is simply a function of psi. So the function is written f here. It should be written capital F and not small f. I'm sorry for that. Not to be confused with the other f that I use during this talk, but it doesn't matter. So it's a function of psi, and if you apply it to a product of two subsystems, subsystem 1 and subsystem 2, you got again the Cauchy-like equation, and then you got naturally then the distribution of probability rho should be a power law. So you have no choice; it should be a psi at the power a. So this is nice because I think this theorem is quite old already. It was obtained by Jean-Louis Destouches, which was a collaborator of Louis de Broglie. And if you want to go further, you have to introduce the conservation law. So you have to introduce the Liouville theorem, so that I emphasized before. And if you do that and you combine it with the previous result, you naturally obtain then the coefficient, the power coefficient should be equal to 2. So you recover bound rules. And in other words, you deduce then the f function, the small f function here, which is the small f function that I introduced in the previous slide, should be equal to a constant, should be equal to 1. So this is to show the parallel between the Maxwell equation, and also to the Everett-Gleason theorem, and it's quite abstract and mathematical in some sense. It shows that if you apply some symmetry, it's natural to get the bound rules. But yes, you can use it as an indication that is a good way, but still, I'm not completely pleased as a physicist because maybe mathematicians will like it, but I would like to have another justification based on maybe on the dynamic of the system. So what I mean is that, now we are going back to the problem of the coarse graining used by Valentini. So I briefly summarize what Valentini did. Not only criticize the work of Dürr-Goshen and Zenghi, this is one point, we can agree or not, but he also proposed a different alternative. So he was using coarse graining, and he tried to apply the Gibbs-Tolman-Ehrenfest strategy, which is to introduce cells in a gamma space, and then to deduce the decay of H function or increase of the entropy, if you prefer, at the coarse graining level. So you obtain this relation, which is simple to obtain if you assume some specific initial conditions. And he say, okay, this should be used to demonstrate that F is reaching 1 asymptotically. The problem is that this equation is not a decay of H. It's not equivalent to the growing of the entropy for all time. It's because it's not a derivative, but it's only a way of comparing a time t at a time 0. So it's not a way of proving definitely the way of the increase of entropy. And so yeah, the proof is not complete. So he went to numerical calculation to justify his claim. That is, then the F should approach 1 in an asymptotical way. And his analogy always was the ink drop mixing analogy that I showed you the last time. The ink drop in a tank of water, the ink drop is supposed incompressible, so like our gamma space cell, and it's changing its shape and progressively covering the full tank. And if you have a coarse graining, you will see that this space is covered by ink. So you will say, okay, this is completely homogeneous, and you have a homogeneous F function, but it depends on the scale, it depends on the time scale as well. So the question, can we prove it? And so Valentini tried different simulation, the other people finding different results. So I will go back only shortly to this problem. Yes, all the sense. Yeah. So I'm going now to not to show the simulation of Valentini, but to show a simulation by Norsen, who disagree with Valentini. So Norsen simulation is a bit similar to the one of Valentini. He's considering a two-dimensional system, and what we show on this panel here is the psi-square function. So it's quite complicated shape, but okay, it's still not too complicated anyway. And the function is periodical, so the period is big T. So after time big T, after one period you got the same pattern, and the two periods you get the same pattern, etc., etc. And instead of showing you the psi-square function, which is not very interesting, Norsen show us the f function, or more precisely the 1 over f function, what I wrote here, f minus. Okay, and the f function, if your rho function, the density of probability is homogeneous initially, so it's covering all the panel here. So the f function is proportional. This f minus function is proportional to psi square. So like that, this square is also showing you the 1 over f function. So I hope I'm clear. And after he's watching how it's evolving in time. So he's telling, okay, this 1 over f function has this property at the beginning, and then after one period is different, after two periods and three periods, etc., etc. And in the simulation that is showing, Norsen is showing, you can see that the 1 over f function is taking a shape which is more and more complicated. Progressively, it's covering the screen, and asymptotically, it's approaching the homogeneous way, the homogeneous f function covering the panel. And he says, okay, this is great. You recover, like Valentini would like, the tendency to have a quantum equilibrium in your system. But there is one point that is important, and Norsen emphasized that. First of all, your dynamic is time symmetric, so there is no way to be sure that you will have this kind of dynamic. Maybe it's only because you use some specific system. Okay. Actually, if you watch in the simulation of Norsen, not at in the time forward but backward, for example, at t equal -1 period, you got this panel, which is quite similar to, but qualitatively similar to the other ones. And this is also a panel which is showing you that if in the future you will get equilibrium, in the past you have also equilibrium. And this is somehow quite similar to the discussion that that Boltzmann had in the 19th century with Zermelo and many other people concerning the status of equilibrium. For one of the arguments of Boltzmann was the following: maybe the universe is only a fluctuation, so we have a kind of maximum of entropy normally, which is always reached, and from time to time we reach a minimum or a local minimum, which is a fluctuation, and we are in one of these kind of fluctuations. So we'll see an entropy growing in the future, but actually it's also growing in the past if you watch it, because the process is defined like that for the fluctuation. And this is somehow the picture that we find in the Norsen simulation. And this is interesting for me because you know, it's fashionable nowadays to have this kind of Boltzmann universe. In cosmology, you have it's fashionable to speak about bounce. You imagine that before the Big Bang there was a period of contraction, and now there's expansion. And maybe in this, in some universe, in some version of this big bounce version, you have a time which is reversed. In some sense, the thermodynamic arrow is reversed, like here. And after you have the big bounce, the big bang, the big bounce, and then you have the normal arrow. And so maybe it's not so unusual to have this kind of process. So I don't know finally if the Norsen result is showing something against the work of Valentini, but it's at least emphasizing interesting property of the work of Valentini. But there's also another thing that is key, and is the chaos. The chaos is problematic because the mixing is not generic in the theory of Valentini. This has been emphasized by many people, in particular Greek colleague F. Timiopoulos, who wrote a nice paper, a review paper about chaos in the Bohmian mechanics. And these authors emphasize that chaos is key for understanding the process of relaxation in the theory of Valentini. And more precisely, you know that the Bohmian mechanic is defined by the phase of the wave function, and sometimes the phase of the wave function is badly defined, and so we have a phase singularity, we call it like that, and so we have vortex around them, around this point, around lines representing singularity. And near also this nodal point, this singularity, we have sometimes some saddle points, some X point as it's called, and they're representing some point where the chaos is very present. So near this point, the trajectory are very sensitive to the initial condition, and these people show, so I will not be able to go to that in detail, they show that if you watch the dynamic of this X and nodal point with time, because they are moving in the configuration space, this generate chaos, and because of that, it's complicated to predict the path of the particle. But it means also that in some area you will have some region where you will go to quantum equilibrium very quickly, and in other one it will not be the case because we'll have some region where the trajectory will be trapped. And for that purpose, they illustrate a simulation. They illustrate the paper with a simulation again in a two-dimensional system. And I don't remember exactly again the Hamiltonian of the system, but anyway, they say that if you have a two-dimensional system and if your distribution of probability rho is very well localized in a small gray square here or here, depending on the initial condition, you will have different evolution. So if you suppose that all your ensembles are located initially in this gray square here, then they say after a long time, your distribution will be spread around the full panel, XY, the full configuration space. And they say this is a signature of relaxation, and they can demonstrate that the entropy is growing, or more precisely, the H function is decaying. So don't care about the presence of a continuous and dash curve. These are two different measures of entropy. But you see that they are relaxing. So after a while, after a number of time, you got the relaxation, and you cannot leave this relaxation. And they say, this author says, okay, that is fine, but if you change your initial condition, if you move your square a bit, and in your configuration space, you obtain a completely different result now. They demonstrate that the square, which is in gray, the upper one here, is becoming the black one here. So, so it means that it's a shift a bit, but it's not so much different from the previous one. And they say, okay, the dynamic is very different from what Valentini would like. It's not reaching quantum equilibrium. It's trapped in some region associated with some limit cycle or something like that. So the thing is not moving too much. And so it means that Valentini procedure is maybe interesting, but it depends really of the way you are. The way of we are watching the system. Maybe the systems are too simple in the example considered by these authors because they are two-dimensional systems, and maybe we need to be more clear about what we mean by distribution of point in a configuration space. Maybe we need a measure of typicality, so a measure of probability which is more precise than what Valentini is using, but still the program is interesting. In my opinion, the problem is that maybe the mixing, the approach of coarse graining that he's using is too difficult to apply, because it's using a coarse graining on the configuration space by using physical scale. But maybe this is not the only way to making a coarse graining. In my opinion, another natural way to make coarse graining is to do averaging of a degree of freedom that we don't consider. And now I'm going to a different strategy, which is called, I will call that the Boltzmann kinetic theory approach, which is going back to Bohm and Jean-Pierre Vigier. Jean-Pierre Vigier was a collaborator of Louis de Broglie in the 50s, and he wrote with David Bohm a paper here on this topic. But Bohm and Vigier were using a dynamic which was very curious, because they say, okay, I have a small system which is immersed in the thermostat, but they say, okay, the thermostat will obey to a complicated dynamic. They call it subquantum dynamic, which is different from quantum mechanics. And the reason for that is that they wanted to have some diffusion process and some constant of relaxation, which will attract the small subsystem to quantum equilibrium. I don't think that it's necessary or maybe elegant to do that. It's simpler to use the Bohmian mechanic and to see if you can do it. So of course, if we stick to Bohmian mechanic, we will have some difficulty, because I remind you that Boltzmann already tried to derive some kinetic equation and to justify the increase of entropy in the universe. This is called the H theorem, but there's a lot of assumption in the theorem, and of course, if you don't accept this assumption, the theorem will not be valid. So this is the same here. So what I'm considering is a kind of molecular chaos hypothesis. I'm supposing that my density for my total systems S plus T, where S is a small subsystem and T is the thermostat, is such that the thermostat is already in the quantum equilibrium. So I have it's already psi squared for the density of the wave function of the thermostat. And for the density probability of my small subsystem, I have rho S here, which is defining the density probability for the small system, which is going to quantum equilibrium. And the fact that I have a factorization like that is telling that I have a strong hypothesis on the correlation. But I mentioned that the phase is still correlated. So even though I have the product for the amplitude, I don't have the product for the phase. The phase is still very complicated. So this is playing a role in my derivation. And if you do that, if you use this notation, and if you want to compute the probability in time, you say, okay, I can define the probability at time t plus tau as a function of the probability at time t using some conditional probability formula. So it's not necessary to enter into the details. You need to compute transition probability between t and t plus tau. And if you apply this as molecular chaos hypothesis, if you make some assumption concerning the Taylor expansion in the power of tau and in this theorem, in this formula, you got the diffusion equation, the Fokker-Planck equation more precisely, which is using the Wigner-Moyal method. This is like that I obtained it. It's quite it's the easiest way to find it. And you get two diffusion equations. So the first diffusion equation is the one for the density of probability rho. So you got rho s equal minus the time derivative of rho s equal a term here, which is the current, the divergence of the current. So it's very similar to what you got in a normal probability conservation. And you have another term here, which is associated with the diffusion equation, with the diffusion process. And the d here, the coefficient d, is the diffusion constant. And I will this diffusion d is proportional to the Planck constant divided by the mass. And it's interesting to note that this number is also present in other stochastic theory, like the Nelson mechanics, which is a stochastic theory which is different from the Bohmian mechanic, which has some common point with Bohmian mechanic, but it's stochastic instead of being deterministic. But at the difference of Nelson's theory, the coefficient here is not exactly h bar over 2m. It's something else. I will go to that after. So anyway, you got a diffusion equation for rho, and you got a diffusion equation for psi squared. And when you do that, you can combine these two diffusion equations. And what you do is that, again, you introduce my favorite notation f, the f function. So it's the real density in the configuration space. But now this is in the subsystem. And you can define the h function, the entropy if you prefer. And you can derive rigorously a Bohmian H theorem with that. So it's quite simple to obtain it. And what is nice is that the derivative is rigorously negative. And you can show like that the H function will decay, and the minimum will be reached when the gradient of f will be vanishing for all points. So in other words, when f will be a constant. So you deduce from that, then the quantum equilibrium is obtained as an asymptotic, in an asymptotic way. So this is a way of demonstrating somehow the tendency to obtain quantum equilibrium in this system. Well, the thing is that the dynamic is can be also seen from the point of view of Langevin equation, because if you have a diffusion, you have also another way of watching it. It's through the dynamic from the trajectory of the system. So you follow the trajectory of the system, and you can define a Brownian motion for the Brownian particle. So you have a system S plus T, so small subsystem plus thermostat. You can deduce from the coupled set of equations, and assuming different properties that I will not discuss, this equation, you can obtain this equation, which is a Langevin equation. You see here the force acting on the particle is containing a gradient of a potential. So the potential is the external force and the quantum potential, a quantum potential, because there are other terms, and the rest of the force is given by dissipation, which is and fluctuation. And you assume a white noise in the model because it's simpler. And so because you have dissipation and fluctuation, you have fluctuation and dissipation, and you can define I can demonstrate that you can define this diffusion constant, and you got a Brownian motion, meaning that the distance between points is growing proportionally to the square root of time. So it's quite natural to obtain this, and it's very similar to classical mechanics. Instead, that we have some quantum potential force, but it doesn't matter. They don't play a role for too much for understanding this property. And now, if you want to have an illustration, I took a model, simple model for electron in metal at room temperature. The gamma constant here is associated with intrinsic dissipation that I say that you have in your system. So I defining a time, a typical time. And you have also at room temperature the Fermi temperature, which is needed for describing the gas of electron, which is playing the role of the temperature in the model. And you can compute like that the diffusion constant for this system, and you got 100 times, let's say, the fundamental diffusion constant that I said before is h bar over 2m. So just for reference, I give you this value because it's of this fundamental constant, because it's not so much different from the typical diffusion constant that you have in gas or in other systems, meaning that the diffusion constant is quite fast and efficient. So the picture that I have in my mind is the following. Imagine that you have a gas of a quantum particle which are weakly interacting, so a thermostat. They are in equilibrium, and if this is one small subsystem which is leaving the equilibrium, it's attracted to the equilibrium again. So the F function, the microcanonical ensemble, is somehow an attractor, let's say it like that. And now what is interesting is if you're making a hole in the oven, and you extract one particle, you have from the free evolution that I mentioned before, the Liouville theorem, so the derivative of F is equal to 0, which means that F is a constant, so Born-Wolff is preserved during the time evolution. And now imagine you make a quantum experiment here, you are far away from the source, then you will recover quantum mechanics prediction. So you will make, for example, a Stern-Gerlach experiment, a double-slit experiment, you will recover quantum probability. But because it was prepared initially in the thermostat. So you see, the way that I'm watching the problem is to connect quantum equilibrium and thermodynamics. I cannot imagine both subjects separated. And because of that, I also connected with cosmology, because cosmology is interesting to understanding maybe quantum equilibrium at the initial time, or some kind of initial time, whatever it means. And maybe at the beginning, there were a lot of atoms in interaction. They found they got the quantum equilibrium property, and then now we live in a region where this quantum equilibrium is preserved, and we have a possibility to test quantum mechanics following Born-Wolff. So that's the general way that I'm thinking. And there's a last point that I would like to discuss. Okay, I put I would like to discuss about entanglement, the role of entanglement. I mentioned that there is a coupling between a small system and a thermostat, but so the correlation is fundamental in this reasoning. And somehow this motivates another approach. It's not completely different, but it's, maybe it's another way, a toy model for watching the problem. So imagine a single electron, so in a blue wave packet here, blue which is represented here, kind of blob, where the wave function is more or less homogeneous inside. And this wave function will evolve in time, so it will become another blue wave packet here, a little bit bigger maybe. And the trajectory will be changed smoothly, like the one which I've shown on the side here, so this black one which is going here, and the red one which is shown here. And so the trajectory inside of the wave packet are quite smooth and regular. Now, I suppose that something happened. The electron is entangled with a qubit with two states, epsilon plus and epsilon minus. And I suppose that one part of the wave packet is entangled with the epsilon plus state, and the other half is entangled with the epsilon minus state. So both epsilon plus and epsilon minus are orthogonal. I precise it. So now you have a new thing which is happening. The trajectory are more complicated. They will diffuse somehow. They will mix, and they can cross. Meaning that if you take the black trajectory here, they will cover the full wave packet of the wire. And I can suppose by symmetry and the other one will cover also the wave packet, and they will cross. It's important to see that they can cross because without the entanglement, they will not be able to cross because there is one famous property in Brownian mechanics telling you that it's forbidden for a trajectory to cross because the velocity is defined by the gradient of the phase, and if the phase is defined in one point, the velocity is defined in one point, and you cannot have two velocities. So at one point, so if you will have a crossing point, you will have two velocities at one point. It will be a problem. But with entanglements, it's possible because you consider not the full system, but some kind of part of the system. You consider only a kind of averaging, or if you prefer, tracing. In a complex space, so the trajectory can cross like that, and you see then the wave mixing. And what is nice with this simple model is that after one time, after a small delta t time here, you can factorize the epsilon plus epsilon minus from the full evolution because, as I said, the half of the wave packet is going to cover the full one. And the second half is going to cover the full one as well. So you can factorize this qubit states, and you can now do it again. You can say, okay, at a new time, this new qubit which is entering into the game. It's entangled with the wave packet again, and this qubit is separating the wave packet into two, and you have again a mixing process like that, and you can iterate it many times, 1, 2, 3, n times. And what you get here is a deterministic map, which is very often used in the literature, which is called the Bernoulli shift map. And it has the property to be chaotic. So the Bernoulli shift map is the following. I use the idea that my system is essentially one-dimensional, so I neglect the propagation of the wave packet. I say only that the dimension which is interesting me is the long axis of the wave packet here. And the x is representing the coordinate of the electron along this direction. And I say that the coordinate of the electron at time n plus 1 is given by the 2 times x at the time n. So you see this is the iterative procedure. Modulo 1. Modulo 1 means that depending if x is larger or smaller than 1/2, you will or not subtract 1/2, 1, in order to stay in the segment 0, 1. So this is one of the most basic deterministic map that we introduce in chaotic theory, in chaos theory. And it is nice because this map indeed graphically shows some chaos. If you draw iteratively the map, you see that xn here and xn plus 1 here are connected by this graph. So if I start from that point, I can go here and obtain xn plus 1. Though I can do it like that and obtain the new version of xn, and then I iteratively again propagate the trajectory, and I can obtain very complicated paths like that. And what is also visible is that if you change a little bit the initial condition, you get a very different path. So it's very sensitive to the condition. And you can see that numerically and from the point of view of number theory. If you decide to write the coordinate of your particle x in a binary as a binary sequence, so if you write it like that, so x equal u1 over 2 plus u2 over 4 plus etc. etc. And where u1, u2, and un is 1 or 0, can only be 1 or 0. So you have a binary description of your number. And now you can write with this notation the deterministic map in the following way. You say x prime equal 2 times x modulo 1. And you can demonstrate, obviously, that it means that u prime, so the series, the binary series associated with x prime is such that you have a shift. So it's the reason why it's called Bernoulli shift. You are shifting the digit to the left. So if you write x prime, you can say that it's shifting all the digit to the left. So the u1, for example, is disappearing. The u2 is becoming the u1. The u3 is becoming the u2, etc., etc. And as an example, here I show you a number, x equals 0.2969, which is between 0 and 1, and which has a representation in a binary sequence of 0, 1, 0, 0, 1, 1. And you can see that by applying this map, that you get this new number, which is different, which is still between 0 and 1, and where you see all the digits have been shifted to the left. And I add a new digit here, 0. It could be 0 or 1, I don't know, in fact, because it depends on what I don't know about my number. Because, no, of course, I suppose that my number is a finite number with a precise definition, but it can be, it could contain an infinite number of digits. It means that you make, of course, always an error when you define a real number. You say a number is given by is given with a certain approximation, delta x. And if you make a mistake or error on this number, imagine that the precision, for example, is 1 over 2 the power n, with n is 133, so it's quite a huge number. So I choose this number only for convenience. So it means that the precision, the error is 10 to the minus 40, so it's very small. Okay, you can say, okay, this is very small error. Maybe it has no incidence, maybe it has no impact on my dynamic. But after only 100 iterations, I got imprecision and uncertainty, which is very huge, and which is dominating the full dynamic. Which means that the system is indeed chaotic. And you can see it graphically. Here I show you what happened when you represent xn as a function of n. And for two different trajectories which are very close initially, so there's the one which is orange and the second one which is blue, initially they are very similar. I don't remember the precision that I choose, maybe 10 to the minus 5 or something like that. And then after a while, they are getting different, and progressively, they become very different and chaotic. And this is a signature of chaos. And you can also show that naturally if you compute the so-called Lyapunov exponent. So if you compute the distance between the two trajectories, you see that there is an exponential factor. The distance is growing exponentially, which is a signature of chaos. So the trajectories are complicated in general in this dynamic, but the probability is very simple, very, very nice, because you can demonstrate a theorem which is well known, which is called the Perron-Frobenius iterating operator, that connect the density of probability at a given time to the density of probability at a previous time, so the previous iteration. And it has this expression here. You see that it's mixing somehow the distribution. And this is nice because this iteration can be solved analytically, and you get this series here, which is a sum, an infinite sum in general of what is called a Bernoulli polynomial. We don't care about the shape of this Bernoulli polynomial. They are simply defined between 0 and 1. And what is important is that the first Bernoulli polynomial is a constant. Okay, is a constant. And what is also important is that in this solution, you see that this exponential factor here, which is depending on the time n. And it means that when n is growing, all the exponentials are decaying, and the only one which is surviving at the large large time, is F is a constant. So you got the quantum equilibrium asymptotically in this process because you got diffusion, relaxation. And this is visible on a numerical simulation. As you can see here, it's a kind of simple calculation. Imagine that I choose a distribution which is indicated in blue here. So this is the F function in my segment 01, which is excuse me, it's the red curve here, which is complicated this shape. I choose it arbitrarily. It depends on what you are choosing, but I wanted to have something aesthetic, so it's like that. That I choose this function. And then you see that after one iteration, you are obtaining the blue curve, which is still complicated. After 2 iterations, you're getting the green curve, which is very flat. And after 3 iterations, I'm getting the flat curve F equal 1, and I cannot even distinguish it anymore from F equal 1. So the system is the relaxation is quite efficient. And the last thing that we can see from this dynamic, this entanglement dynamic coupled with chaos, is that you got at the end a kind of Boltzmann equation. So you get if you go to the continuous limit, you can obtain this equation. The time derivative of f is equaling this function here, and you can derive H theorem. So you can demonstrate that the entropy is growing and is obtaining is reaching its maximum when f equal 1 again. So you again justify the Born rules, the quantum equilibrium, the microcanonical ensemble, if you want, using this this approach. So yeah, you see, I present to you many ways of thinking about the problem. I'm not sure this one which is better than the other one. They are all very useful, I guess. The mixing argument of Valentini is sometimes criticized by some researcher, but I like it because it's anyway it's a good it's a good old tradition. It's going back to Gibbs, so it's certainly a good way to follow this. There's also the strategy of Langevin equation, diffusion equation. I like it because it's connected to Boltzmann and Bohm and Vigier. The typicality is not so bad as well, but the typicality, when you think about it, is connected to some definition of probability. So in my way of thinking, is not cannot be the end of the story. It's only the starting point, let's say. And you also deduction made on symmetry, like Maxwell, Wilson, and Everett. I should add Goldstein, Struve, and all these people. They are all making some nice reasoning with the symmetry of the wave function and to justify Born rules. But at the end, what you got is that I try to convince you is that you have a very rich framework, which is for me much more interesting than the Bohr and Copenhagen point of view, which is not demonstrating anything, that it's only assuming the law. Whereas here we can discuss about the justification of the law, and we can debate about it, and maybe you can test experimentally if the law is correct or not. So yes, with that, I think I will drink water and stop, just a little bit, and then we can discuss if still somebody is still alive. Voilà. Sorry. Yes, I put all the things here.
Thanks a lot.
I was fast. I'm sorry.
It was great. Thank you. Time for questions.
I agree that it's I don't manage to summarize this topic in a simple way because it's complicated. But I tried.
It was very efficient as far as I'm concerned.
I'm sorry if somebody is not if I miss some clarity. Okay, we can discuss. No problem.
No, I'm going to open to questions. So anyone. So I'm not going to write down names because we have enough time. So whomever wants to go first.
I would have a very quick question, Aurélien.
Yes,
if I may.
Yeah.
Vincent.
Okay. Thank you very much, Aurélien. Just very quickly, and this fits also with your last slide. So what is your own perspective on this? What do you think personally, and as what is maybe, for instance, the most fruitful approach you think? Or
I have no clear opinion on that. I'm quite open. I like all of them because when you read history of statistical mechanics, you realize that everything is going back to the great master like Boltzmann, Maxwell, Gibbs. They already thought about all this issue, and they were all right. And I think that okay, maybe some of the reasoning are more general than others. It depends. I don't know. But I cannot have a personal choice. Maybe some people will think differently. I wanted to show you a series of view, and probably they are all a bit right. Yeah, I prefer a bit the one of concerning the chaos, but it's not enough, because if you want to have chaos, you have to explain which kind of distribution you use in your system, because chaos is not enough. It's a property of the dynamic, but then you need to make some constraint on the density probability. For example, if I'm going back to, I will try to go back to that. Yeah, if I'm using this curve here, and I use a distribution to show you that I can reach the quantum equilibrium. But this is working, of course, only if I'm using a smooth density probability. If I'm using a Dirac peak, I will see only a singular wave function, a singular trajectory, and I will never reach quantum equilibrium. I will never reach. So this is not a proof. There is no. We need some ingredient of typicality somehow. But typicality means that you need some, from what I said before, that we need to have already some postulate for the initial conditions. But we don't know the initial conditions. The problem, maybe we will never know, because we have a limited knowledge about the universe. So it seems natural to use we go back again to you cannot go out of the circle. We are trapped in the circle. Maybe the Born rules has to be postulated from the start, and we stay like that, and then we have no problem. If I interpret the work of Dürr, Goldstein, and Zanghi in that sense, then it's fine. We can, but I would like to say, maybe if we go a bit away from the quantum equilibrium, so maybe there's one small subsystem which is not in quantum equilibrium, and the other one is in quantum equilibrium. Maybe it's still working. So this is the other strategy. Yeah, but the Valentini maybe is too optimistic. He's thinking that it will derive it from I don't know for which hypothesis, because he has no really constraint on what is on his initial conditions. He's trying different things, and he's making simulations, but we need some to be precise about the initial conditions. So this is difficult for me to have a clear view on the strategy followed by Valentini. I think that at least the other strategies are less ambitious, but maybe they will work better. They are less ambitious, so they are getting less, of course. But, I forgot to speak about ergodicity, which is also another approach, but ergodicity is limited to some specific system, but it works on a very limited case. Yeah.
And then just very quickly, according to you, do you think there's going to be any kind of empirical evidence or something like that who could
this is the claim of Valentini. When I'm going back, since I have no keyboard, I have to go back slowly like that. Problem with my keyboard, so I'm using the mouth, excuse me. Hey, go back, yes, more or less, I'm coming. Yeah, it's coming. Yeah. Sorry, where is it? Yes, this. Yes, this. I did not show you this slide, but it doesn't matter. Though, here I show you, this is the law of large number. I say the probability of an event, of a sequence of events, is typically the frequency. So it means that for the overwhelming majority of cases, in your configuration space, you got the Born rule. What it means by the overwhelming majority, it means that the fluctuation, if you consider non-typical system, you have a fluctuation which is going approximately as the square root of n. So if you see, this is it's a number which is decaying very quickly with n. And the problem is that imagine that you have a huge system. Then this number is very small. So the fluctuations are very, very, very small. So I believe that quantum mechanics is valid with a very huge, in that sense, with very high precision. So the Born rule will be valid with very high precision. In the universe, we have probably around 10 to the power 80 atoms. This is a number that we got sometime in cosmology. So if you have 10 to the power 80 atom, you have a fluctuation of 1 to the power 40. 10 to the power 40, excuse me. This is a very small number. 10 to the power 40, 1 over to the 10 to the power 40, it's a very small number. So you have probably, it means that quantum mechanics, if you believe it like that, Born rules should be valid with this precision, ultimately. So I have a pain to believe that we'll never reach this precision, of course. And it means that maybe the strategy of Valentini is a lost cause, but maybe we will see one day this kind of the fluctuation at this level. We never know. So yeah, I don't know.
Thank you.
Jean is
follow up on a question from Jean.
So I'm waiting, drinking water because when you speak a lot, so excuse me.
I would like to make two comments. One is that if you take a real wave function, for example, if you take a particle in a box in the ground state, and the wave function is real, nothing moves.
Yes.
And all distributions are stationary, of course. And then, of course, my objection to the psi-square rule is simply that the natural measure I would put on the particle in the box would be a uniform distribution in the box.
Yes.
Grounds. But that doesn't give the right prediction because the ground state is a cosine or something like that. And then the high distribution is a cosine square. So for some reason, you're less likely to find the particle near the boundary of the box than in the middle of the box relative to the Lebesgue measure. And that is, of course, something, that's why I say it's an independent postulate, because I don't see how you can justify that. Unless, of course, you say, well, the box wasn't isolated. But if you have at the beginning, of course, it's not realistic, but if you at the beginning of the universe, you had a bunch of isolated boxes, then the statistical distribution of positions there would not be given by, I mean, would be given by psi square, presumably, but then you have to assume that you can't derive it from anything because there is no dynamics. That's one remark.
Yes.
Another remark is a more general thing about the law of large number. You see, we may, I mean, okay, we may more or less agree on Bayesianism, but you see, when you say that the probability of an event is so and so in Bayesian, from a Bayesian point of view, it's a judgment. It's not a fact. You're assigning a probability to certain events. When you take frequencies, these are statements of facts, you're observing them. So you cannot identify them, and the law of large number tells you that the probability that the frequency be equal to the probability of the event is close to 1. But you are still talking about probability, so you can't define probability through frequencies. You see, if you take 1,000 coins, you throw 1,000 coins and say, okay, with large probability, we'll have approximately half, 500 heads and 500 tails, but then it's still with large probability. So you can't define, because then if you define probability through frequencies, then you have to say, well, if you take 1,000 times 1,000 throw of a coin, then blah, 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 and you have a regression at infinity. So it seems to me that one has to not identify the two. And of course, the probability allows you to predict the frequencies if the probability are well chosen. But then, of course, what does it mean to be well chosen? And what does it mean to be explanatory if you choose probabilities and so on and so forth? I mean, this is too long to discuss now, but it's
very long. It's a very difficult, it's an interesting topic. So I will try to answer to the first question. Is to be shorter. So I agree with you that in the example of the box, in fact I wanted to discuss this example, but I removed it because it was already too much. In the box, indeed the gradient of the phase is constant, so the gradient of the phase is equals 0, and so you have no motion. So the point is that this kind of systems are already idealization, firstly, because I suppose that if you have already a system which is in the ground state, then first it will be problematic because they will not have interaction with the universe, and so you have always a coupled system in general. So a genuine state of that kind is idealization, but that's not really the point. That the most important point in my answer. the interesting point is that indeed you're right. This is how you define the probabilities measure in your theory, which is important because the general feature for me is this delta gamma measure. This is a trick, okay, it's a notational trick, and F is the density probability. In your example, when you say that F is it's natural to put F in front of 1. This is because you use, let's say, a measure which is dx and not delta gamma. But okay, why not? This is not prohibited. This is only based on what you want to attribute as an indifference principle to the different point in your cavity.
Yeah.
But at the end, I use the different. If I use the measure delta gamma, I have the advantage to be close to the Liouville theorem. So then the microcanonical ensemble can be justified from the James principle of maximizing the ignorance. So this was discussed in my previous talk. I'm sorry I didn't show it here, but so I agree that that's not enough, but at least we can connect it with the point of view of James and Shannon. If you choose the delta gamma measure, because in that case you can define you have a delta gamma measure which is a constant of motion, and so following the strategy in statistical mechanics, if you have a constant of motion like that, it's a good way of defining a probability measure. But it's not enough, I agree.
The problem is that I would give a uniform distribution if I didn't know anything about quantum mechanics, and so would you. And then, because we know quantum mechanics, then we say the initial probability distribution should be changed. That sounds weird to me. And of course, everything you say about delta gamma is a bit circular, because in that particular exam, every distribution is stationary because the particles don't move. So, you could take any distribution and assume to be the natural distribution of the Lebesgue measure. But then, of course, I'm making that comment simply because, and then I have also another objection to equivariance, to choosing the measure as being invariant, like the Lebesgue measure equivariant. That's something you know very well, is that in chaotic dynamical systems, you can have stationary measures that are physically relevant, that live on an attractor, yet study the evolution of almost every point relative to the Lebesgue measure in a neighborhood of the attractor, which is the point, the set of, the neighborhood of the attractor, which is the basin of attraction of the attractor, namely all the points which are going towards the attractor. So you can have a stationary measure which is singular relative to the Lebesgue measure, and yet you take as a measure on initial point the Lebesgue measure because the Lebesgue measure is natural.
Yes.
You are not taking the Lebesgue measure on initial point because it's stationary because of Liouville's theorem, but because it's natural. And you do it even in system where it's not stationary because the system is not closed.
Yeah. So we are always going to the debate about what is natural or not, which is somehow telling that when you want to choose a probability, we are already assuming from the start the result somehow. It's the reason why I said that the law of large number is a bit tautology.
No, you can give arguments based on naturalness on the basis of the indifference principle or the maximum entropy principle.
Yeah.
Of course, you have to. Okay, anyway.
No, it's I agree that the point could be debated a lot. Yeah.
Yeah, that's true. Anyway, I want
to. Questions? There is Alberto trying to talk. Wait. Wait. Alberto? Oh, yes.
You me?
Yeah. You can go.
Hi. First of all, thank you very much for the presentation to Aurélien. I just had a question regarding the discussion of Destouches and the analysis of the possible functional forms of the probability.
Yes.
You explained that he implies that has to be a power law. That from there should be equal to 2.
Okay. This one, yeah.
Get the same conclusion from the equivariance argument.
Yes, exactly the same.
My question is, I don't see in all that arguments why is A equal 1 excluded. It seems to be too simple or not liked, so it's not even included in the text.
I don't remember that. I'm sorry.
The reason is that C bar also has a continuity equation. It's the only other functionality.
Probably, but
it does.
Oh yeah, this is far. I will not be able like that to see it.
Oh, I know it requires a bit of a discussion of the math involved, but
yeah.
I don't see at first sight any reason to exclude A equal 1 from all the arguments.
Maybe you're right. I will watch the theorem. I think I mentioned that the result was used by this guy Jean-Louis Destouches. I found that in a small book in French, which is not published anymore, unfortunately. But he wrote these kind of things in the 50s and 60s already with his wife, Paulette Février. And it's quite mathematic and very often abstract way of thinking about the quantum mechanics. And my interpretation of their work is a bit personal. So I used what they did. And they got this formula, and of course, the fact to go from from general A to A equal 2 is natural in the sense that it has to recover somehow the reasoning of equivariance. So it's natural. So maybe if I have the problem in equivariance, it has to. If you have this problem with A equal 1, it has to be also present in the reasoning of Struve and Goldstein, but honestly, I didn't go through all the steps of the calculation by these authors. I see, okay, it works, I believe, but maybe... it
would be interesting to see if A equal 1 is being excluded a priori, not because it's excluded by an analysis.
Yes.
Because it's the only other probability for which you have a continuity equation from Schrödinger equation case.
So okay.
Bern theory probably.
Interesting to watch. Okay. I will have to go back to the calculation.
Okay. Other questions? Maria has one.
Yes. Removed. Oh no. Okay, so now more than a question is, I would be interested in talking a bit about the approach, the path, let's say that you talk in your last slide, you call it sub-quantum. That means looking at the dynamic. Yeah, and in particular, so you can also stop to the Langevin equation if you want. Just because, just comment a bit because I like this idea that since now we are dealing with the distribution of probability of something that is moving according to trajectories, we want to find the law of motion of these particles, and I noticed that that you propose the Langevin equation as equation of motion.
Yes, it's true.
And I just wanted to talk, to further comments about it, because I can get, what is very interesting for me is this fluctuation term, because it normally arises from some noise, no?
You have to have noise, otherwise, and the noise is coming from the environment.
Yeah, exactly.
In that model.
Yeah, so it's. I'm interested in particular because we had this interesting conversation with Angelo Bassi about, and he was telling to us that he was looking at the equation of the GRW theory in his last formulation as somehow an effective equation in which the stochastic term was arising from the from some kind of noise that these microscopic constituents, it was not talking about particles, but I mean, something below, something more fundamental was undergoing this noise, and then there was this stochastic term. So in your vision, I mean, this fluctuation term that you can be a bit the same kind of thing. I mean,
yes. I mean, it can be written explicitly because the dynamic is complicated. In general, I use a kind of a simple, typical model which is a particle linearly coupled to a bath.
mm-hmm.
The bath is a sum of oscillators, and if you solve it analytically, there are papers about that in the 80s in the context of decoherence theory. You can obtain this kind of diffusion equation at the end of your computation. And the specificity of the problem here is that I'm using the Bohmian mechanic, and Bohmian mechanic of the quantum potential, which is very complicated object in general. So I have to assume many things in order to get a tractable Langevin equation. Otherwise, it's horrible. And anyway, the picture that emerged from this theory is quite intuitive in the sense of a Brownian motion, because this is a usual Brownian motion, usual Langevin equation that we get. But you see, there are other possibilities. You can assume from the start that you have dissipation and fluctuation without trying to connect the theory to Bohmian mechanic. David Bohm himself, I think, will not like the term Bohmian mechanics because it was invented not by him, but by I think Goldstein, Dour, and Zenghi. But for Bohm and for Vigier, the idea was to introduce a subquantum dynamic, as you mentioned. And so the subquantum dynamic was referring to another way of watching the universe at a different resolution. So because they were thinking about a kind of fractal universe, where they said, depending on the resolution, you see different things. And they said that the fluctuation and dissipation and some residual effect of the presence of another level of ontological level, they call it subquantum level. This is like that they saw it. And they say, phenomenologically, I will introduce fluctuation and dissipation.
Okay.
And Bohm and Vigier had different perspective on that, and there are many models, and they not completely agree with each other. Sometimes when you watch the literature, they're very different. And there are a lot of papers about the story of introducing fluctuation and dissipation for completing the Bohmian mechanic. But I don't know what to choose. So I decided to be conservative in the sense that I stick to Bohmian mechanic. But unfortunately, because Bohmian mechanic is complicated, I had to simplify a lot. No,
but it's fine. It's just that, yeah, I mean, there are these terms. I see why putting them, but as you said, I see also that there are several possible ways in which we can explain the presence of these terms. Because, I mean, when we are dealing with a particle and the bath of harmonic oscillators, we know what is the point, we know how to derive them. But here, what does create this term? I mean, and this was I mean, I know that no one has the answer, but just this fascinating topic.
The fluctuation in the phase, because the only for the point of view, I think, of Bohm and Vigier, I think they were convinced that it was connected to the fluctuation of the metric, things like that, or of the ether. They introduced even some ether. So okay, why not? I don't know.
Yeah, there are possible. Okay.
I don't know. So probably you can develop this way of thinking in different directions. Yeah. Personally, I wanted only to emphasize a bit some connection with the stochastic strategy and the Bohmian mechanic strategy, but probably it's already known. Okay. It's not so original. It's,
No.
if you watch the literature between De Broglie, Bohm, and all these people, they were already thinking about this different possibility. Sometimes they were not able to give a mathematical statement very clear. But for example, if you read, there's a very old paper by Jean-Pierre Vigier and David Bohm from the 50s, which is, I give the reference here. The problem is that this paper is going very quickly to the mathematics, and is not deriving very much or is obtaining the result. And the most interesting part of the work has been published by Vigier in his PhD thesis in French. And we can find it now translated into English, unfortunately. But my own work was strongly inspired by the work of Vigier during his thesis. But and he was using an approach with BAF, which is phenomenological in the sense that he's introducing this thermostat and this diffusion constant in a priori way, but without clear justification, natural, intuitive justification, but not very much connected to Bohmian mechanics. But De Broglie was thinking differently. Apparently, I read in a book that he was imagining that it's really connected to the phase of the environment, which is fluctuating. So he was thinking that everything should be connected to Bohmian mechanics in some sense.
Thank you.
I don't know if I was clear.
Are there questions?
I suppose I have a slightly broader one, if that's all right. I don't know if you have any comment on this, but I remember reading somewhere someone had come across some stuff regarding path integrals. So taking a path integral approach to quantum mechanics. And then, I mean, it's fairly standard that the paths are imaginary, so you can't view them as ensembles of things in the usual way. However, they then pointed out that certain collections of paths, which looked absurd, could be viewed as a sort of ensemble. I don't know if that links in any way to the things you're talking about.
Yeah, there are people thinking about that. I have a problem with this issue. The Feynman ontology, in fact, the Feynman formalism is not an ontology. That's a problem. If you want to make a theory with the Feynman path, you have to be prudent. Because there is no notion of trajectory like in Bohmian mechanics. You can sum the path, you can see that path are fractal or path are indeed depending on the resolution on which you're watching them. But you have to be careful. Feynman himself, in his book with Hibbs, wrote a lot about this analogy between diffusion process and trajectory and Schrödinger equation. And he was claiming that somehow he wanted to show a picture of it, which is intuitive, but it was only a sketch because if you think about the trajectory, you think that you have to think about what happened when in a double-slit experiment. In a double-slit experiment, the electron is going to the left or to the right. But in the Feynman path, they are going everywhere, the trajectories, and you have to sum currently the trajectory, and there is no one which is privileged. So it's a tool for computing, but in order to get further to the dynamic, you have to be prudent. There's one guy in France who tried to apply the trick of Feynman. It was an astrophysicist called Laurent Notal. He tried to develop a model of a fractal universe. I remember that I was reading when I was a student. I was fascinated by this approach. But actually, I don't think anymore that it's an active topic. I don't know. Maybe he's continuing to work on it. But he tried indeed to justify with the Feynman path the approach. And he was even making some connection with stochastic mechanics and to Bohmian mechanics without quoting sometimes the Bohmian mechanic work. And yeah, this guy is maybe a connection with the Feynman strategy. Yeah,
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, oh, Jean. Yeah.
There's a follow-up from Jean.
Yeah. Well, I think about the Feynman path integral, I think one should emphasize the fact that it's, you know, it's a purely formal thing. It doesn't make any mathematical sense except for imaginary time, where there it becomes a diffusion process. It becomes like the Wiener measure. But you see, if you take literally all these paths, people say, oh, well, the particle goes through all these paths. I don't know what it means. In Brownian mechanics, there are lots of paths, but of course, there is only one per initial condition that the particle actually follows. I think the Feynman path is really another way. It's a sort of intuitive way to write the solution of Schrödinger equation, but it's nothing more. Mathematically, it's not. It just looks nice, but it's just a way formally to write the solution of the Schrödinger equation. You don't get anything either mathematically or conceptually different from the solution of the Schrödinger equation.
Yes, I agree.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you. There are other questions? I think I have a quick follow-up on Maria's point, just to see if I got it clear on the subquantum option.
Okay.
I think I read the paper from Callender, and there is a section about that. I guess you recalled it. It talks about this paper from Deotto and Ghirardi. Ghirardi, obviously, from Ghirardi, Rimini, Weber. And I think it talks about this adding this stochastic kick, which, as far as I can see, is something like the fluctuation term. I mean, you can do it in that sense.
It's very nonlinear in the same sense, in the same time, because it has to produce a kind of collapse. So yeah, I don't know. I see it is a different approach. But you have stochasticity. It could be mixed. Huh? It could be mixed. I mean, I think Brownian mechanics can be mixed with the Ghirardi-Riemann strategy. There's no problem with that. But
yeah. I'm not entirely sure what's the option Deotto and Ghirardi want to propose in the paper. I was just trying to comment on what Callender seems to argue against that, which is that basically once you add, no matter in what term, no matter how, whenever you add some kind of stochastic kick, which again is a very broad term, I think Callender uses this term in a very general way. Yeah. But if you do that, the idea is that, of course, from a pragmatic point of view, you are giving some kind of, you're explaining something, but it's not very clear if that's what he wants to do, which is finding what he called the ultimate reason for equilibrium. So I just wanted to understand if his objection, let's call it objection, would apply to this case as well, regarding the definition of fluctuation.
Yeah, then okay, I have no idea if I think it depends really what is the model that you are using. There's a lot of arbitrary, there's a lot of physical element in the Ghirardi-Riemann approach. So there's a lot of assumptions. And if you introduce one or more hypotheses concerning chaos, stochasticity, I'm not sure you will change too much to the problem. I would be very pleased to see a model emerging from a different, let's say, continuous approach. For example, there's something that is interesting is that in Brownian mechanics, there's a quantum field approach of Brownian mechanics for bosons, which was developed by Bohm. For me, it's the most original part of concerning the contribution of David Bohm. So Bohm, at the end of his paper in the 50s, discussed a bit about the application of his theory to the photon field. And he says, okay, the photon is not a particle, is a field. And so we can argue with him if you want, but since it is a field, it is a continuous system. And he said, okay, the light, when it's propagating, is not a particle, but is a wave which is spreading like in classical physics, but it is obeying the Schrödinger equation. So you have like in the Schrödinger equation, the standard Schrödinger equation, the coordinate x is the classical object. Here, the classical object is the field, which is filling the space. Okay, and so you applied somehow to the standard Schrodinger equation to a continuous system, in other way, if you want. And the thing which is curious when you watch this evolution of Bohmian mechanic from the Bohmian mechanic point of view is that you see that you have a field equation which is a continuous and regular field equation, but you have also quantum term, quantum force term in the dynamic equation, which is representing the specificity of Bohmian mechanic, and which is also including fluctuations. Okay, and for example, in a very basic experiment with a single photon experiment, you send a photon through a beam splitter, and you have two detections. Transmitted or reflected. Why is that? Why is happening? Why the theory justify this? You have to couple in this theory a fermion, so the detector, to the photon. The photon is completely delocalized field, and the fermion is very well localized. And you say then non-locally somehow the wave function is collapsing in a certain sense, in an effective way. So when I saw this model, I said today it's very strange because it's Bohmian mechanic, you see. It's rigorous Bohmian mechanic, but it shows some analogy with collapse theory. Personally, I don't know if the Bohmian mechanic should be applied to the field like Bohm did for the photon, but there is an analogy, and the fluctuation can also be introduced in the field because the quantum potential, which is acting this theory, has some connection with the fluctuation in the 0-point field fluctuation, for example. If you watch the ground level of your system, then you see that there are fluctuation, and the quantum potential is giving you an energy of this fluctuation. So it's really connected. And in his last book, David Bohm and Basil Hiley wrote a lot about that. I think the school of Bohm, of physicists working around Bohm, were very interested in this topic. And I think it was reminiscent from the previous collaboration with Jean-Pierre Vigier when he was using the subquantum dynamic. You see, he was trying to think about a picture of the universe with the field coupled to fluctuations, and depending on the resolution, you get different things. And maybe it's connected to what you were telling, and maybe then this approach can have the common basis. I don't know.
Yeah, thanks. So just noticing that it's interesting to see that they share similarities when they get to this point. So it'd be nice to see why it is so. But thank you. That's interesting. Other questions?
So I suppose vaguely inspired by that response, though going off on a bit of a tangent. So you were talking about viewing quantum fields and how they propagate through space and how that could represent, if it's constrained to a Schrodinger equation, then that could represent things. Mm-hmm. But what about situations where you are viewing space-time itself as quantized? So if you take the perspective of loop quantum gravity, then the idea of a propagating field is also a bit of a mess. And it just inspired, just thinking about that just then, maybe ask the question, what on earth is the quantized space-time for Bohmian? Depending on your knowledge of this, I never, you have the volume elements, you have fixed volumes and they vary and those sorts of things.
I wanted to find a reference because you remember I wrote a reference about Struve. So where is this guy? You see, Jean, I try to pronounce it correctly. I'm not sure because I pronounced it correctly, Struve, but yes, it was here. Yes, I say that this guy is very much involved in this discussion about cosmological application of Bohmian mechanic. And Valentini is also interested, but I think Struve worked a lot about the application of Bohmian mechanic to quantum gravity. He wrote some paper on different versions of quantum gravity. So the basic version of the Wheeler-DeWitt equation, for example, which is the first version of quantum gravity, which was going back to the 60s, and which is associated with DeWitt and Wheeler, and which is indeed associated with the application of the standard way of quantizing the field, so the canonical formalism to the gravitation field, but it has some pathology. But still, the model, the theories apply nowadays for cosmology. I think even the work of Stephen Hawking was based on this model. So they were sticking to that during long time. And so many work on inflation cosmology are based on this approach because it's the most known theory. But Struve applied Bonnard mechanics to this theory. He was not alone. Valentini did it as well, and Peter Holland as well. And yeah, that's nice. He also wrote some article on loop gravity, quantum loop. And there's another guy, I think it's called Nikolic. It's a guy from the Balkan. I don't remember exactly where he's.
Croatia.
Croatian, thank you. Yeah, he's working on the superstring theory, but I never read this paper in detail, so I only see that he was working on superstring theory in the context of Bonnard mechanics. But yeah, this is speculation, a lot of speculation.
Of course, John, please.
Yes, well, I have a question for people who speak of, quantum space-time and fluctuating space-time. You see, you have the same problem as you have in ordinary quantum mechanics. People assume that there is such a thing as space-time. But if you do quantum field theory or quantum whatever, you only have a state, a wave function. And the wave function, like in ordinary quantum, let's go back to non-relativistic ordinary quantum mechanics, then the wave function tells you what will be the result of measurement, but it doesn't give you a probability distribution on particles position, because by assumption, there are no particle position. If you introduce particle position, then it means you're Bohmian. If you do quantum field theory, people think there are fields, and they say, well, the field fluctuates, etc. But there are no fields. They're just a wave function, a sort of a function defined a space of distribution, which is a bit complicated. But there are no fields. It just gives you a probability distribution. In practice, it gives you a result for scattering experiment. And if you do quantum space-time, I think it must be the same thing. People imagine a wave function that is defined on a set of space-time, but the space-time themselves don't exist. They're just arguments of the function, unless you introduce so-called hidden variables a la Bohm.
Yes.
And so on. But then, of course, you are Bohmian, and then you could ask, what's the evolution equation of those objects?
But you're right, John. It means that when you watch the story of general relativity and the way of quantizing general relativity, it seems that Bohmian mechanics is the only clean way currently for interpreting this theory. Even though it's very speculative, I agree, but maybe quantum gravity doesn't exist. Maybe gravity should not be quantized. We don't know.
We don't know. We don't know.
We don't know. I know that, for example, Rosenfeld didn't like it. That is at least one part of his life. But I don't know if he was. At the beginning of his career, he was working, I remember, with De Broglie on pentadimensional theory of gravitation. He wrote a paper on the fifth dimensional theory. But after that, I think he wrote that maybe gravitation should not be quantized. And I remember that in the book of Feynman on quantum gravity, Feynman is a bit discussing about this argumentation. Why the gravitation should be quantized or not. And one of the arguments was that if you want to build up a Schrödinger experiment with the gravitation, maybe you can imagine a Which path experiment with the gravitation field and things like that. So, but the thing is that the argument of Rosenfeld, which was very, very good, is that anyway, it's very tiny result. So, and I think Dyson as well, we did not like it. Dyson, the Nobel Prize for the same time. Oh no, he didn't get the Nobel Prize, sorry. He didn't get the Nobel Prize. He should, but Freeman Dyson.
I suppose it's a very broad response to that.
Yeah.
Do you fundamentally feel that things like, for me, continuity and real numbers, these are a degenerate form of just discrete things. You know, they exist because they're useful, but it's not really there. But for you, is continuity a real thing? Are there real numbers?
Oh, yeah.
Are the real numbers real, I suppose, is what I'm getting at.
I know Gisin was writing paper about that recently, but I like very much the continuity personally.
Yeah, we had him giving a talk on this topic, so we are
I like very much continuous space. Oh, yeah, but yeah.
I think Vincent had a finger. Oh, sorry.
Yeah.
Sorry.
You can certainly do physics without real numbers.
It's difficult, it seems. Maybe with the finite.
But it's not, I mean, I don't see the point because we don't know that they exist, but we don't know that they don't exist. So I don't know what's the point.
For me, it's a question of granularity. I mean, if you can say things are finite until they're just too big or too small, and you have a logic that allows you to do that, I think personally that's preferable to real numbers. Although more difficult to talk to people about in dealing with literature that's out there.
I know that even some people try to apply this strategy to the many-word approach to explain the Born rule in the many-word approach. They say that maybe even the probability of the amplitude should be discretized, and when the amplitude is too small, so it doesn't exist. So there are some theory like that, but so you can construct probably a nice theory. At the end, like Bohmian mechanics, the question is how to discriminate this from experimental.
I can imagine it wouldn't be distinguishable, perhaps, but I was more curious as to where it left you feeling about the status of real numbers and things like that.
I prefer a real number, but I'm not blocked on that. There are some nice pictures of Bohmian mechanics in discrete space, which are interesting. For example.
Okay, that's interesting.
I don't know if Vincent had a finger a couple of minutes ago. Maybe.
Yes, just a very quick and short comments on back to Bohm mechanics in the quantum gravity context. I think there is a kind of tension there because on the one hand, one of the strong points of Bohm mechanics is the clear receipt it gives and the clear ontology and so on, these kind of things. But the weakness maybe in the quantum gravity context is that these strong points are somehow linked to kind of rigid notion of space-time somehow. It seems to be linked to this. And if you take kind of GR perspective seriously in the sense of the dynamical perspective of dynamical nature of space-time, so maybe there is a tension there when trying to apply the Bohmian perspective in the quantum gravity context. Okay. Or you lose the Bohmian spirit. You can still apply the receipt to some extent, but then the clarity of the ontology, these kind of things, which are really the strength of the position, then somehow vanishes to some extent in the quantum gravity context, where dynamical nature of space-time is taken seriously. So I think there is a slight tension there.
Yes, especially with the preferred frame, which is very often introduced in Bohmian mechanics, because this is a very curious feature associated with non-locality. If you want to have this preferred reference frames, this preferred foliation in space-time, okay, and then you have this is an ingredient of Bohmian mechanics, and for me this generates some curious conflict with the spirit of general relativity. Maybe you have no choice to accept it if you want to develop Bohmian mechanics, but maybe Bohmian mechanics is not the final truth. Huh? I hope that's not the case. It's not the final truth. No.
One can imagine perhaps if things are, at least on the loop end of things, if things are all superpositions of spin networks, one could imagine there's in fact a preferred spin network, and the states there is a select spin network, which is actually true. But you can't tell because it's hidden as to which spin network you actually have. I don't know how far you could push that analogy, but it doesn't seem outrageous when compared to treating things as particles.
Spin network is very useful indeed in general for quantizing general relativity. It's one of the modern tools.
Okay. If there are no other questions, I think there are. Okay. Well, so I'm going to thank Aurélien again. Thanks a lot. Applaud.
Thank you very much.
Thank you all. It's very nice.
So I think I will send an email with the link for the recording in case you want to have a look. And yeah, I'll soon send you also an email about the next meeting. We'll decide. Probably we're gonna stick to some related topics so we keep the discussion going. Maybe something again on Bohmian mechanics. We'll see. Anyway, I'll let you know fairly soon.
Other things in Bohmian mechanics in life, but why not?
Sorry.
There are other things than Bohmian mechanics in life.
Don't tell me. Don't tell me. I know that. No, it's that we spent basically 6 months without talking about Bohmian mechanics. So now we feel we should, you know.
Okay.
Thank you again. And see you next week, I hope.
Okay.
So,
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.